Public service is about serving the public. History is our only reward if we want to serve the citizens of our country and claim a better future for our children. Democracy is about diversity, it's about ideas and differences and reconciliation of man to those differences we face every day so that men and women can be as they were meant to be, free and independent. This is the backdrop for me when I decided 8 weeks before the last federal election last year to found our party and to stand candidates in every seat in the House of Representatives and the Senate for the 2013 election. Ideas are the keys that open the door of change. It's not individuals. Personalities that are not that important. To demean someone individually, for members that sit opposite you in Parliament, shouldn't be what the game's all about. It's about the right ideas for our country and what our future should be. At the last election, the Palmer United Party won 5.5% of the vote nationally, becoming Australia's fourth largest political party. We have today over 10,000 members of our party throughout the Commonwealth. Palmer United outpolled the National Party, and Palmer United elected one member, me, to the House of Representatives, and 3 senators, only to find that our last senator denied his position by the Senate and by the AEC, losing the ballot papers in Western Australia. Palmer United and the motorists held the balance of power in the Senate. In the re-election in Western Australia, our vote increased by 150% at that election to over 12% of the vote. In Fairfax, Palmer United received one of the largest swings in the nation's history when I got 50.3% of the vote. Many Australians believe that a vote for our party was a wasted vote, that no party could be elected with members in Parliament that could make a difference in such a short period of time. And I think we've shown that that's not true. And we've shown that by exercising our votes in a judicial sort of way, we can make a difference for all Australians. Today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about that story, about the differences we've made and how we did it. We must put the rights of all Australians a principle for political expediency. The entrenchment of the two-party system in Australia has robbed the nation of the contribution of the great majority of Australians. Palmer United candidates were successful in winning Senate seats. Glenn Lazarus was elected in Queensland, Dio Wang was elected in Western Australia, and Jackie Lambie was elected in Tasmania, meaning our reach across this nation and the ideas that we put forward at that election were truly national. Even before I'd assumed my seat in Parliament, Palmer United was making a significant impact on the Australian political scene. At the Abbott government's first cabinet meeting on the 18th of September 2013, a decision was made to adopt a Palmer United policy that no party official could be a lobbyist at the same time, as he was a member of their political party. This was an issue that I'd personally campaigned strongly on, and one of the reasons why I resigned as a life member of the Liberal Party. So already at the first meeting of Cabinet, we were seeing our policies being implemented, not because we had the numbers in the Senate, not because we had the numbers in the House, because it was the right thing to do, and ideas were more powerful than necessarily holding seats in the Senate. On the 19th of November 2013, I introduced my first private members bill into the House, the Foreign Acquisition and Takeover Amendment Bill of 2013, designed to prevent the Treasurer from approving the GrainCorp takeover and transferring the decision to Parliament. I also enlisted the help of Bob Katter, Adam Brandt and Andrew Wilkie to keep the GrainCorp in Australian hands. I received telephone calls of support from a number of Liberal and National Party members for my position. It seemed the National Party could take the view, because the Liberals had the Treasurer, and the Treasurer would decide that there was nothing that they could do and they had no responsibility. By moving that bill in Parliament, by taking the responsibility back to the Parliament itself, we changed that equation. And enough political groundswell happened on the coalition that the Treasurer announced in late November his decision to block the takeover of GrainCorp. On the 2nd of December, I delivered my maiden speech to Parliament and I focused on the needs for ideas and diversity for our nation. And on the 18th of December 2013 was the highlight of my year, when the wife that I'm madly in love with gave birth to our daughter, Lucy. So that was a great end of 2013 for me personally. And on the 12th of February 2014, here at the National Press Club, I delivered my address on the need for electoral reform, where I criticised the Australian Electoral Commission for a number of shortcomings and mistakes, which became evident during and after the September federal election, as well as a number of ongoing systematic problems which I had identified. In a constructive reform proposals, I included the requirement for voters to show identification before they are permitted to cast a vote, and electronically linking polling booths in each electorate to prevent multiple voting, and a range of other proposals. Both of these proposals will be, I understand, recommended by the parliamentary committee charged with that responsibility. So I feel that our party at that time was able to make a positive contribution that will translate into real change for Australia in the future. By this time, the AEC was under considerable pressure right across the nation, in particular due to the loss of 1,370 Senate votes in Western Australia, resulting in a court-directed rerun of the entire Senate election. And following my address, there were senior resignations from the AEC one day after I delivered that address here at the Press Club. So I think we made a difference. In March 2014, on behalf of Palm United, I introduced my second private member's bill into the House, which called for the establishment of a joint committee to inquire into the establishment of the Australia Fund, a fund that would enable the timely distribution of aid money to Australians adversely impacted by natural disasters such as drought and flood, as well as many small businesses affected by events beyond their control, such as the global financial crisis. In the House of Representatives, keeping Qantas Australian-owned and opposing the payment of any government subsidies were also key issues for Palm United, ultimately successful in both of these matters in the Senate. Palm United at that time demonstrated a strong support for the Australian Defence Force, men and women and their families. This support also manifested itself in the party policy to introduce fairer yearly indexation on pensions received by ex-servicemen and women through the Defence Force retirement and death benefit system. Palm United wanted indexation for all former Defence Force members, but the government insisted on only those aged 55 years or over. Rather than oppose the bill and deny a large group of ex-servicemen and women an increase they deserved, Palm United supported the bill, but we made it clear to the government that this was not an ideal outcome and that we would continue to fight for a fair pension indexation for all ex-servicemen and women. I have since that time been very critical of the government's insulting low pay offer to currently serving members of the ADF. In late March, I campaigned for Palm United Senate candidates in the lead up to the Western Australian Senate re-election on the 5th of April 2014, with D.O. Wang securing a Senate seat for the party. And however, this time, our overall vote was increased from 5.5% in Western Australia to just on 12.1%. But at Budget Day, I gave a large number of media interviews expressing my opposition to the government's unfair and unnecessarily harsh budget. On the following day, I gave another set of media interviews and hosted the Clive Palmer budget lunch for journalists. It was an extraordinarily large bill for beverages on that dinner, I should say, right, at the Hyatt Hotel in Canberra. Palm United's role in pointing out the unfairness of the budget should not be underestimated. My speech delivered at the Hyatt at the same time as the Treasurer delivered his has had over 96,000 views on YouTube, while Joe Hockey's speech has only had 17,000 and Bill Shorten's 77,000. Palm United was first to point out that Australia's debt was only 12% of GDP and the OECD average was 73% of GDP. That Australia was one of only 13 countries in the world that had a AAA credit rating. Yet we had such a bad debt problem. You wonder what the rest of the world was. Australia spends on health around 8.9% of our GDP, while in the US they spend 17% or more of their GDP on health. Australia's debt crisis was made up and the Australian public agreed. And that's the reason why the budget today still hasn't got the support of the Australian people. Palm United laid out a comprehensive argument that cuts to Australian government expenditures on social services, higher education and unemployment benefits were unnecessary and unfair. As John Kennedy said many years ago, for in the final analysis, our most common link is that we all inhabit this small planet, we all breathe the same air, and we all cherish our children's future, and we all are mortal. When truth triumphs over injustice, everyone is the winner. The inconvenient truth is a truth that we must face together as a nation and as the entire world. There could be no justification at any time for closing down enterprises when it's profitable and providing income and jobs for Australians. This is more so when that enterprise is by its very efforts providing a better solution for our environment. Palmer United senators opposed the abolition of the Clean Energy Finance Corporation in the Senate and saved the Clean Energy Finance Corporation to fight another day. The Palmer United Party's role in the Senate was to keep faith with the Australian people. Palmer United will not support any change to the renewable energy target before 2016 after the next election. We thought it was important that the government should take to the people what it really stood for. Palmer United in the Senate refused to allow with the motorists, to allow for the abolition of ARENA. And we refused to allow for the Climate Change Authority to be abolished and stood as the last sentry of the gate protecting the Clean Energy Corporation. All of those things are major achievements by our party. All of them are policies that the Greens have been fighting for years but have done nothing about. And that's the difference about politics. It's not just being there saying you stand for something, it's actually doing it and delivering on it. And it's unprecedented in this nation that we've been able to achieve those things in such a short time. As Australians, we must put the interests of our people before our own individual interests and the interests of all people of the world ahead of all else. Palmer United condemned direct action, and by doing not enough, too late. Palmer United advocated for a global ETS, and the government stood firm against it. Recently in Parliament House, Minister Hunt, together with Bernie Fraser, Chairman of the Climate Change Authority, and I announced that Palmer United would support direct action and the government would retain the Climate Change Authority, and that the authority would be charged with reporting to Parliament in 2015 and 2016 on Palmer United's proposal for the establishment of an ETS and the international developments at that time. So we kept hope alive, right? As well as the future targets of the RET. The direct action Palmer United had agreed was very different from the direct action the government had proposed. This became apparent when in the Senate, each one of the 15 amendments proposed by Palmer United to the bill was carried by the entire Senate, with the government supporting it. It also became apparent when there were 4 additional amendments from Nick Xenophon. Despite all the talk about climate change in the world, we are still a developing world with such a huge population and still face very serious problems of unbalanced development, poverty, environmental degradation. We seek a better world for Australia and for all citizens of the world. Palmer United's achievements on the environment were to retain the Climate Change Authority, to retain ARENA, retain the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, initiate an international ETS investigation, reporting back on the 2015 and 16. 15 amendments passed in the Senate on direct action. The passing of direct action itself, launching a global ETS initiative with the support of Al Gore, retaining the RET, and initiating the Climate Change Authority to recommend what the future RET targets could be every year. So that's a lot to achieve when you're only thinking of standing of Parliament 8 weeks before the last election. And it wasn't over yet. Al Gore and I, on the same podium, created tremendous interest in climate change in Australia and generated extremely positive publicity feedback around the world. I was contacted from people in New York, London, Europe and Asia to address other meetings about climate change to see what we could do. Somehow they thought it was topical that someone like me, a coal baron, could support climate change. I don't know why Christine Mill didn't give me an accolade. I don't know why I didn't get an award from the Greens, right? Because here I was, a coal baron, with 8 billion tonnes of coal in the ground proven, and another 490 billion tonnes of coal. But I'd never mined 1 tonne of it. So I'd never been allocated for not mining it. I'd just been criticised because I had it. What we need to do is to think about retaining our resources and doing all that we can do for our environment. At a joint media conference in Parliament's Great Hall, Mr Gore praised our party's overall environmental policy on environment, notwithstanding his concern regarding the proposed repeal of the carbon tax. I announced that the party would move amendments to the carbon tax repeal bill to ensure the full savings that power companies received under the repeal were passed on to everyday Australians, and specifically identified on their energy bills when they received them. As the bill was initially presented to the Senate, it did not have the full protections for the consumer that we said we would vote for. Heated discussions and negotiations took place with the government, and the government finally conceded to Palmer United's requirements and the Australian consumers and of electricity and gas have seen their bills be reduced by up to 10% a year. So we took a critical stand in the Senate and delivered on a very important promise. In late June, I started donating my parliamentary salary to local community groups, and a total of 167 cheques were forwarded to a diverse range of charitable sporting organisations in my seat of Fairfax. The Murdoch press was reporting that support for me as a member of Fairfax was falling away just before I hosted my Fairfax weekend at the Palmer Coolum Resort in the middle of my electorate of Fairfax. All residents of Fairfax received brochures in the mail inviting them to take part in the weekend, to view the Palmersaurus, to enjoy the Palmer Motorama Car Museum, enjoy live entertainment, attend our employment workshops and our political forums. As part of this weekend, I hosted and spoke at a number of community forums together with our Queensland Senator-elect, Senator Glenn Lazarus. 42,000 members of the local community attended that weekend. And the Liberal Party, at the same time, had a sausage sizzle, sent out 200 invitations, got 54 acceptances. You know? The community forums were packed with standing room only. Traffic almost came to a standstill in the local area for this unprecedented event. After that, I paid little attention to the Murdoch press. In early July, the party established a parliamentary office in the National Press Club building just next door, which will be used for the party meetings and other activities as necessary. The leasing of these premises was necessary as the Prime Minister continued to refuse requests for additional resources and facilities necessary for the party to appropriately address its balance of power responsibilities. On the 17th of July 2014, the Clean Energy Legislation Carbon Tax Repeal Bill was passed in the Senate. The repeal of this unfair tax not only enabled Australian businesses once again to compete on a level playing field with their overseas competitors, but it also ensured that the dealing with climate change remained a key national political priority. Support for an ETS, now at over 70% of the opinion polls, was only at 35% then, at the last election. Palmer United's political strategy had succeeded, and in the final analysis, that support will ensure that an ETS is implemented because the people of Australia want it as what the world needs. Palmer United's detailed and comprehensive submission to the Parliamentary Australian Electoral Commission highlighted a range of shortcomings with the Australian Electoral Office and the election itself, as I had been strongly criticised by a section of the media and my political opponents for raising concerns about the AEC in general and the conduct of the 2013 federal election in particular. This was a matter of concern. But my critics have conspicuously been silent since the Acting Australian Electoral Commissioner, Mr Tom Rogers' testimony before the committee vindicated Palmer United's position on the running of the last federal election. After weeks of negotiating, many bottles of red wine and dinners with the Finance Minister, Matisse Cormann, and persistent fellow that he is, we came to an agreement in relation to the Minerals Resource Rent Tax Repeal and Other Measures Bill of 2013, which was passed in the Senate. Before it was passed in the Senate, I sat listening in the gallery of the Senate to what the arguments were for the Greens and what the arguments were for the Labor Party. And they basically said that we had to retain the school kids bonus, we had to retain low-income super, and we had to retain the low-income support bonus. And I thought that was right. And I said that to the government, that we can't pass that bill unless we retain those things. So negotiations and discussions between Palmer United and the government ensured that the spending measures attached to the bill would not be altered for the term of the current parliament, giving the Australian people and the Labor Party the opportunity at the next election to support us in the retaining of the school kids bonus, the low-income superannuation contribution and the low-income support bonus, so that the Australian people could decide. They were all retained in their current form. And this was another victory, we think, for Palmer United in the Senate, showing what can be done to support these policies which help many Australians. This ensured the party was able to keep its promise to all Australians to retain these important measures to the next election, and that we would force, as I said, the Labor Party to stand up for these measures at the next federal election. As part of the agreement with the government, The government supported my initial private member's bill for parliamentary joint committees to investigate the establishment of the Australia Fund and another parliamentary joint committee to inquire into measures to further boost Australia's trade and investment performance. So we'd already established 2 parliamentary committees in the short 3 months that we've been in operation to put on the agenda some of the concerns that we had. These parliamentary committees have now been established. And again, the repeal of the mining tax, the retention of the important social security measures and the creation of these important committees represented important achievements for the Palmer United Party. Through its balance of power in the Senate, Palmer United had vetoed so that Qantas would remain in Australian hands. The federal government could not provide financial incentives to Queensland and other state governments to sell off public assets through the proposed asset recycling bill. And Australian jobs in the offshore oil and gas industry will not be lost to foreign workers in the offshore resources activity regulation. Again, we'd succeeded maintaining these measures for the benefit of the Australian community. Negotiations between myself and the Minister for Immigration and Border Protection, Scott Morrison, regarding possible changes to the government's refugee and asylum seeker policy had been ongoing for several months. The outcome of these extensive discussions was an agreement to achieve a number of positive outcomes for refugees awaiting processing and the Australian community in general, including the guaranteed relocation from Christmas Island of 1,550 people who arrived before the 19th of December 2013, including 436 children and their families and 32 unaccompanied minors to the Australian mainland for processing. The saving of billions of dollars to the Australian people and the positive contributions to the Australian economy by the introduction of the Safe Haven Enterprise visas. The agreement with the government provided that the SHEV is to be available for up to 5 years to those who are found to be refugees, that it will allow people to work and study rights and requires them to live or work in a designated region to fulfil regional job vacancies and allow them to apply for other onshore visas such as family, skilled and student visas after 3.5 years if they are not accessing welfare. The government also agreed to continue to support assisted voluntary return packages, particularly a mechanism to reunite unaccompanied minors with their families in their home countries. I thought this was a win-win situation for 27,000 people who have been locked up in detention with no hope for themselves and for the future. We regard it as a win-win agreement and it represented an outstanding achievement for the party in providing a common-sense solution to what had been a long-running and almost intractable problem. The challenge this week, as Parliament sits for the last time before Christmas, is to ensure that this agreement is followed through in legislation, and if properly implemented, will save Australia up to $3 to $4 billion a year. At the end of September, the Palmer United Senators and I received an accolade of being selected as the number 2 position in the annual Australian Financial Review Power Index, behind only the Prime Minister. So we had made an impact in the short months we'd been there, and we had tried to actually do the right thing by the people that elected us. A motion proposed by Senator Glenn Lazarus in the Senate was passed for a Senate Select Committee to investigate certain activities of the Queensland Government, and this was passed in the Senate. The inquiry was supported by Labor and the Greens. In examining a number of aspects of the government in Queensland, including the reformation and operation of the Crime and Corruption Commission, the alleged polarisation of the Queensland Police Service, and government intervention of the state's judicial and legal processes. The inquiry follows 2 previous inquiries by the Senate, set up by the Coalition, into the activities of the Queensland Government. In 2007, an inquiry into the plan to construct the controversial Traviston Dam was held, and in 1993, the Heiner Affair inquiry, which was ironically chaired by Joycelyn Newman, Calman Newman's mother, was set up to inquire into the Queensland Government. 3 public hearings have so far been conducted. In the first sitting week in October, Palmer United Senators voted with the government to firstly enact tougher national security and counter-terrorism legislation, and secondly to ensure that Australian companies can seek intervention by Fair Work Commission before industrial action takes place, if a strike will have a significant economic impact on the national economy. Also in that sitting week, the government was forced to introduce into Parliament modified or split bills relating to changes of social services. This action by our party in response saved over $10 billion of benefits for Australians. Other parties supported it, so that the initial omnibus bill was changed, which proposed cuts to a range of services for a large number of most disadvantaged members of the Australian community. Throughout September and October, I continued to have discussions with the Environment Minister Greg Hunt, as I've said before, on a possible future for an introduction of an ETS. Initiatives consistent with my promises to Vice President Al Gore earlier in the year. Our discussions culminated in an agreement between the government and my party, announced in a joint press conference with the Minister and Bernie Fraser on the 29th of October 2014. The agreement incorporates amendments to the Carbon Farming Initiative Bill 2014 to give more power to the Emissions Reduction Assurance Committee, to extend the duration of contracts for carbon credits, to prioritise energy efficiency initiatives, enhance the role and increase the funding for Climate Change Authority. Most importantly, as stated earlier, it was agreed that the authority will conduct a special review to assess whether Australia should have an ETS in the future and what conditions should be triggered in such a scheme. This agreement, announced by President Obama, the President of China, between the USA and China on emissions control, announced just before the G20, reinforces Palm United's policy to establish an ETS as part of a global solution to climate change. 7 days ago, Jackie Lambie resigned from our party. There's been constant media and political pressure to destroy what we'd achieved against all odds. Glenn Lazarus, Theo Wang and myself have a high degree of commitment to continue to do our best to serve the Australian people. As the largest party on the crossbench, besides the Greens, who always vote with the opposition, we have a key role to play. Senator Lambie will continue, I believe, to vote with Palm United on most issues. In summary, Palm United has, by its influence, established 2 joint committees and 1 Senate Select Committee. Much of what Palm United has done has been reactive to the government's agenda. For 2015 and 2016, we'll be concentrating on what needs to be done to provide greater economic activity in Australia for the benefit of all our citizens. The forward projections in August 2013 projected company tax receipts for the year 2014 would exceed $70 billion. Instead of companies paying their tax quarterly in advance based on an estimate, we need to let them pay it yearly on actual results. By keeping $70 billion in enterprises' hands, Palm United's policy would create real demand, massive job growth and end major unemployment, and turbocharge our economy. This is because we know that business can spend that $70 billion better than government can. If $70 billion is spent by individual taxpayers during the year, the government gets 10% GST. I estimate that based on increased economic activity, the government gets an extra $7 billion every time that $70 billion turns over. If it's spent only 3 times during the year, the government gets an extra $21 billion of revenue. And the government will receive the $70 billion at the end of each year when companies finally know what they've made for that year. This would mean more hospitals, schools, a rise in living standards, and we could use our money more better than government. It also requires us not to borrow any money, but to use the money that we have in our own system. Growing the economy and increasing revenue means we can make immediate changes to make Australians' lives better. We need tax reform to reduce the personal income tax the average Australian pays. A 15% cut will mean that the average taxpayer will have around $2,500 to spend each year. The increased demand and activity will boost jobs and investment and boost small business profits and create more jobs. If that $2,500 circulates in our economy even 10 times during the year, which it would, the government will receive the $2,500 back anyway as GST. But one of the arguments by the Prime Minister and the Treasurer, if it hasn't already been, will be that they want more GST. Australia must abolish, I believe, the fringe benefits tax to release over $4 billion into the economy. Fringe benefits tax is a negative tax. It stops Australians doing things. It stifles demand and growth and kills employment. We don't want to penalise people for spending money. Spending money makes the world go round, creates wealth and creates jobs, and makes the pie bigger for all of us to share. And we have to think about the first $10,000 that we pay on a home loan, I believe must be tax deductible. We can boost the construction industry and increase home ownership security. We can revamp the Australian dream for each Australian to own their own home. By boosting construction, we increase revenue. By collecting more GST and group tax, increasing employment and moving people from the productive workforce into the productive workforce from welfare. Australia must reduce the taxation rate on a person's second job, giving all Australians the incentive, providing government with increased revenue, which would not be paid if a person sat back and didn't have a second job. Palmer United, make no mistake about it, has killed the co-payment. There will be no co-payment. Make no mistake about that. I'm sure you'll hear more of that in the coming days and weeks ahead, but the co-payment is finished, right? Australians cannot tolerate Australian citizens dying in the corridors of our hospitals. Healthcare is declining every year in Australia, and we cannot desert the sick or the dying. Our hospital staff are overworked, and the capital infrastructure is not up to the projected increase in demand. As the third lowest debt country in the OECD, we need to provide $80 billion of additional funding for health across Australia and make such funding available directly to hospitals. Australian citizens' lives are as important as any lives of other people living in the OECD or members of the government. As Robert Kennedy said many years ago, an injustice to one man anywhere is an injustice to all men everywhere. The Australian government is the main petitioner of bankruptcies and company liquidations. Businesses close, employees lose their jobs, and the government loses group tax, company tax, exports, GST, and as a result, services in education and health have to be cut to protect the revenue. If the government stopped driving businesses to the wall, that wouldn't happen. To transfer people from gainful employment to unemployment just guarantees misery for the families. I believe we need to have a Chapter 11 situation here in Australia, where you can sell the equity of a business to recover a debt, but the business continues. People remain employed. The enterprise continues. We continue with our exports. And I'm calling on the government to introduce the same system that operates in the United States. Under Chapter 11 in the US, 85% of all businesses which go into Chapter 11 emerge and continue. And that keeps those people employed, it keeps them off welfare, and it keeps our nation's exports going. A free nation can rise no higher than the standard of excellence set in its schools and colleges. Ignorance and illiteracy, unskilled workers and school dropouts are failures of our education system in the past and breed failures in our social, our economic system. Delinquency, unemployment and chronic dependency. This is a waste of human resources, a loss of productive power and purchasing power, an increase of tax-supported benefits. The loss of only 1 year's income due to unemployment is more than the total cost of 12 years of education through to high school. Failure to improve education performance is not only poor social policy, it's poor economics. We must educate our children as our most valuable resource. We must make it possible for those with talent to go to university, but only if there are jobs for them to find once they've finished their studies and once they've graduated from university. That's why our ability to compete internationally, to expand our exports is so important, to create growth, not to cut things. Our universities must gain incentives to compete internationally. They were once one of Australia's key exports, and they can be again. We need to revitalise our industries and their infrastructure. Japan has become the world's third largest economy by processing Australian resources. Wages in Japan are higher, cost of energy is more expensive, and Japan suffers from the tyranny of distance. Yet Australia sells its mineral ores between $40 and $200 a tonne, and Japan sells the final products for up to $20,000 a tonne or more. To create jobs, to generate more government revenue, a stronger balance of payments, the Australian government needs to encourage the use of mineral resource wealth in Western Australia and Queensland to support downstream manufacturing in the states and territories that don't have these resources. States such as New South Wales, South Australia, Tasmania and Victoria. This will create jobs, increase our exports and provide greater revenue and a rising standard rather than a declining standard of living for all Australians. Higher export revenue means better education and better health service for our people. Regional Australia has been, as you've seen with the decline of the National Party, the forgotten area of Australia by all political parties. We need to return to a time which operated in this country in the 60s and 70s and support regional Australia by introducing zonal taxation system. This will provide an incentive to decentralise Australia and to maximise the delivery of services across the nation. We must ensure regional hospitals have doctors, that regional industries develop for the benefit of their communities and for all of Australia. Palmer United believes that 25% of the wealth generated by our rural communities needs to be reinvested in those communities to establish growth. Palmer United has scrapped the carbon tax. Electricity prices have come down by 10% across the nation. Palmer United has, in its agreement with the government, set up an inquiry into the Climate Change Authority to investigate the ETS and listen to the voice of the Australian people. 95% of Australians agree on all issues, yet Labor and Liberals spend 100% of their time arguing about the 5% of things that Australians disagree on, causing division when Australia needs unity, causing disruption to industries when we need a joint effort. It's not the Labor or the Liberal way, it's the right way that really matters. You know, when the Anzacs went overseas, they didn't go overseas as members of the Liberal Party or members of the Labor Party, they went as Australians. We need to put the idea of a class war behind us and to unite this nation. I just wanted to pay tribute today to our leader in the Senate, Senator Glenn Lazarus, who's just been taken to hospital with a condition, and we all want to support him and wish him well. I want to also thank Phil Collins, my Chief of Staff, who's worked overtime during that period, and our party director, Peter Burke, who's been seeing over 10,000 members across the country, and Dio Wang for his magnificent victory in Western Australia to keep hope alive. If Australians are happy with all that's being done now, it's enough, it's sufficient for them and their families, they can be satisfied with the Abbott government. But I believe we can do more. This nation has the strength and potential to live out its heritage and fulfil the dreams of the Anzacs, to return Australia to being a lucky country it should be. Palmer United will continue to serve the Australian people, whether we're re-elected or not, for the remainder of the 44th Parliament and beyond, I hope. All the best.